The reality incongruence syndrome. Geneva, late at night. The vacuum pumps breathed steadily, as if someone had set a metronome to them. Luke sat in CERN's dimly lit server room, where the air smelled of metal and stale coffee. On the screen, a block of results. A comparison of DNA samples from volunteers before and after a series of quantum data teleportation measurements. Code windows flickered, graphs faded. One column refused to fall into place. Identifier V042, male, 36, control group. The medical record showed a gene variant associated with nicotine metabolism. In the post-procedure sample, a different allele, resistant to addictions. Luke restarted the pipeline 3 times, downloaded archival snapshots, checked 2 barcodes. There was no error. There was a mismatch. He called V042 back for another interview. The man arrived with a worn backpack and a polite confusion. "Are you sure I signed up for this?" he asked. "I'm actually a musician. Although, strange, I do have a calendar entry in my phone about a medical exam in a chem lab." He laughed awkwardly, but there was weariness in his eyes. On his wrist, a thin scar. Such injuries weren't listed in the intake forms. Luke turned on the recorder and followed protocol. Childhood, first language, injuries, allergies, memories that could be verified. The man confidently described an apartment on a street that didn't exist in Geneva, mentioned a wife by name not found in any registry, named the make of a guitar he bought with his father, though his father had died when he was 3. In the documents, not in his memory. When V042 left, Luke was alone with the emptying screen. He opened his personal encrypted journal and typed, "Subject lives not in his own reality. Not an experiment error, a coordinate error." His fingers lingered on the keys before adding, "If coordinates are swapped once, they can be swapped again." Somewhere deep in the building, a relay clicked, and in the silence, it sounded like a quiet confirmation. The first thing was the statistics. Luke pulled anonymized databases, medical records, city archives, migration trails, school enrollments. He was searching for discrepancies that couldn't be explained by human error. He found photographs with geotags from places where the person had never overlapped with any bank transactions. He found people fluent in a language they learned at school, though the school had never offered that subject. He found doubled biographies folded like a sheet of paper in half. He began marking cases on a map of Geneva. By Friday, the map had turned into a starry sky. Each point, someone whose life had slipped off its rails by a millimeter. The syndrome needed a name. Luke called it Reality Incongruence Syndrome, RIS, a condition in which a person's internal identity markers and external records diverge significantly and irreconcilably. He started meeting the people. A woman who remembered 2 brothers, though archives showed 1. A lawyer convinced he had served in the army, though the Swiss army had no record of him. A chef who knew the taste of a peanut allergy but could eat peanuts without issue. Private details formed a manuscript of the impossible. In the evenings, Luke reread his notes, adding little flags. Possible transfer, simultaneous link collapse, DNA marker anomaly. In one case, he found a match that took his breath away. A woman from Lausanne and a man from Zurich had identical rare insertions in a non-coding section of their genome, as if their genetic texts had once been printed by the same machine. They had never met. In this reality, no. The hypothesis he wanted to dismiss was becoming the only one that explained everything at once. Some people inherit a trajectory of the world that isn't their own. Their memory, character, even molecular minutiae belong to a version of themselves from a neighboring branch, where choices were different. At the end of the note, Luke put a restrained period. The correct versions live, but not here. A theory without a tool is comfortable philosophy. Luke didn't like philosophy. He assembled a team of 3. Mira, a control electronics engineer, David, a quantum channel specialist, Tom, a physician researcher. They locked themselves in a basement where rows of racks hummed like rain in other countries. Sometimes, in rare pauses, the team would sit on an old couch against the wall, drink instant coffee from plastic cups, and argue over who should be the first returned. "Just not relatives," Mira said, running her finger along the cup's rim. "Personal motivation will ruin it." Though, she paused, and in that pause it was clear she'd allow exactly one exception. David was always sketching on napkins, circuits, graphs, quantum diagrams, which were left on the table like tiny maps of parallel worlds. Tom spoke the least in such conversations, but once admitted to Luke, "I'm not afraid someone will disappear. I'm afraid to see the one who comes back." The idea was cruel and clear. Build an interface that synchronizes the local quantum state of a personality with the nearest correct branch. Not body relocation, reconfiguration of connection patterns. Mathematics put it plainly, minimize the distance in state space. The ethical translation sounded worse, replace one person with another. The first volunteer was a middle-aged man who had lost his feelings for the wife he remembered as the love of his life, but not here. He signed the consent form, his trembling hand circling the checkboxes. The procedure took 9 minutes. At minute 6, his pupil dilated. At minute 8, his face lit with a strange clarity of recognition. He opened his eyes and asked, "Where's Annika?" In his current life, there was no Annika. In the correct one, there was. Side effects appeared immediately. He didn't remember his boss, didn't recognize his neighbor, was puzzled by items in his own kitchen. The correct branch filled the place like water filling a crack, evenly, coldly, without asking the one who had lived there before. Tom was silent in the elevator. Mira voiced what they were all thinking. "And the one before, is he gone?" Luke answered honestly, "We see no trace." The words rang metallic. The next day, they repeated the experiment twice more, at the persistent request of the patients themselves. Both returns brought relief to those who came, and a yawning absence to those who were no longer there. That night, Luke wrote in his journal, "Every successful return is someone's quiet death." Question: who gives us that right? Answer: those who ask to have their own life back. Rumors seep through any seal. In university corridors, people whispered about the machine that fixes fates. Some posted anonymous praise, others furious denunciations. At night, there were knocks at the lab door. Luke looked through the peephole and didn't open. Morning news aired the first reports. Gray silhouettes of people against a picket at CERN, signs reading, "Return my daughter," and "Leave us alone." In closed chats, they discussed how to spot the wrong ones by small biographical inconsistencies. One forum was outright called the blacklist of realities. Luke read those threads and felt the technology begin to live its own dangerous life. And then Elisa came. She carried herself like someone who had rehearsed her speech for a long time. "I'm wrong," she said as soon as she sat down. "In that branch, I broke too much. Here, I managed to become someone else. I don't want to go back." She listed facts without pathos: addictions, deaths, broken relationships. Here, a job, a team, a person with whom she finally felt at peace. "If you fix me, you'll kill not the one who deserves death, but the one who finally stopped being dangerous." She said she moved between rentals, changed jobs every 6 months, never used bank cards. "I'm afraid of official medical exams," she added quietly. "If someone compares my tests with the archives, it's over." Sometimes she helped others. Once, she led a guy through an underground passage to the station while they searched for his return at the lab entrance. Luke listened and at the same time heard another voice, internal, tabular. The system demands integrity, data, purity, the hypothesis, testing. Elisa noticed him turning toward the monitor and added softly, "I know you have a goal, but sometimes the goal should yield to the person." He didn't reply. He simply put her file aside. The next day, 2 colleagues from a neighboring group came, not his people, but from the same building. They smiled too broadly. "We have access to your builds, Luke. We'll try on our own sample. We also want to help the world." Their first returns went uncontrolled. One man screamed when he recognized the wife he'd left 10 years ago in another branch. Another sat on the hallway floor, repeating the names of streets that didn't exist here. The lab smelled of ozone and guilt. Elisa sent a short message, "I'm afraid." Luke realized the experiments no longer belonged to him. He had to know exactly whom he was letting into others' lives. For that, test himself. Luke gave blood, saliva, recorded a full autobiographical narrative. Addresses, scars, teachers, the first movie that seared an image into memory. On key words, his heart began to beat more distinctly, as if something inside were listening. DNA showed microscopic deviations from childhood tests, nothing extraordinary, but together like a foreign accent in a perfectly learned language. In the family archive's metadata, he found photographs that couldn't exist. Him in a blue jacket by a house his family had never lived in. In a summer folder, a photo at a lake they'd never visited. In a video, his mother said, "Luke, don't run," but the intonation sounded as if she were using the name for the first time. He accessed the interlab network and found what he didn't want to. An analytical note from the forensic department of a neighboring branch, cached during an accidental mirror sync. The identifier matched his biometrics at a level excluding chance. In the correct reality, Luke Eldridge was a serial killer, acting with cold-blooded consistency. The victim list, names, ages, cities, was as dry as an accounting report. At the bottom, a recommendation for return for public safety. When he reached the victim list, his fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from a strange recognition, as if he were reading the names of people from a dream he'd had for many years and tried to forget. For a moment, it seemed he felt the weight of a knife in his hand, heard the nighttime silence of strangers' apartments. The images vanished as abruptly as they had come, leaving a sticky cold in his chest. Luke sat until the monitor went dark, then lit again. His hands were perfectly steady. In this reality, he taught, corrected protocols, returned people to themselves. In that, he was someone who must never be returned. Mathematics said one thing, minimize the distance. The ethical language found no words. He went out at night to the empty waterfront. The lake's water lay still. If I'm wrong, he thought, then that's exactly what makes me right here. For the first time in many years, he felt fear not for the theory, but for himself, as a person who could vanish at someone's insistent, "That's how it should be." The next morning, 3 people entered the lab, 2 from the neighboring group and the facility administrator. Their phrasing was smooth, for transparency, for reproducibility, for public safety. They knew. How? There was no point guessing. Luke's return was only a matter of time, paperwork, and a neat letter to the ethics committee that loved the word precedent. Elisa appeared in the hallway before he could decide. "Come on," she said. "Don't let them decide for you." They went down the staff stairs, always smelling of dust and hot metal. At the bottom, a room with the equipment Luke had built with razor-blade patience. He saw the machine as if for the first time, a set of polished fears. At the exit, he noticed a crumpled newspaper on the floor. On the front page, headline, "Opportunities and Threats of Quantum Correction." Below, photos of smiling politicians. Luke realized that if he left quietly, sooner or later the machine would be taken by those who decide the fate of millions without knowing them. He understood he'd leave behind a void, in science, in the chance to help those asking for help. But he also knew that a perfectly working machine in the wrong hands becomes a tool of forced correction. Colleagues who eagerly returned strangers would tomorrow put anyone on the table whose biography seemed wrong. Luke cut the power, removed the safety covers, and pulled 3 synchronization modules, like a surgeon who knows where the artery runs. He didn't destroy everything, left the system able to work only in voluntary mode, requiring consent from both sides via a two-way channel. Without it, no transition. The mechanism of coercion became a precise instrument of help. When security burst in, it was too late. Protocols were clean, the machine not. Luke raised his hands and said, "I didn't break the world. I removed from it the ability to break people." Elisa disappeared into the lobby crowd, dissolving into the noise that always rises where human choices are made. That night, he packed a small bag, turned off his phone, and left his apartment, leaving a note on the table. "If one day I ask, return me. For now, no." 6 months passed. Luke lived under another name on the outskirts of a small town, where mountains reflected in windows so close they seemed touchable. He worked in a private data lab that required precision and quiet. He liked the simple task, putting other people's data sets in order without touching their lives. In the evenings, he visited a bookstore with a large display window. The owner kept an old popular science section and a children's shelf where the covers stood like colorful houses on a quiet street. Luke sometimes picked a book at random and sat by the window. It was enough to watch people walk by, unaware of the possible branches of their fates. One day, he noticed a reflection, his own. In the reflection, he was smiling slightly, though he himself wasn't. The movement was barely perceptible, like a ripple from wind that wasn't there. He froze, waiting for it to repeat. The reflection looked calmly and directly, like a person with a purpose. Inside him rose that familiar cold wave. Not panic, but clarity. Somewhere nearby, the other one was looking for a way. He closed the book and stood up. At the door, he told the owner, "I'll be back tomorrow." She nodded, giving the words no weight. Outside, the air was warm. Luke walked along the shop fronts, and in each pane of glass, his profile differed slightly from what he felt inside. Shadows always live beside objects. Sometimes they want to take their place. He didn't know how much time he had, but he knew the boundary he would not let be crossed. No one, not a machine, not a committee, not a correct version, had the right to kill the one who had managed to become better. He stopped by the water and looked at his reflection, now not in glass but in the dark mirror of the lake. It was exact and calm. He nodded to it, like to a stranger worth respecting, even if he looked far too much alike.